Nice. Wow. I mean, this thing.
I think.
Okay. There's no one there.
It on when you talk.
Right.
Otherwise, it makes sound all weird.
Good evening. Welcome to the February 4th Council Committee meeting. My name is Mike Kimling. I'm a council member from Ward 2, and I will be chairing this meeting. Besides myself, the council committee members here tonight are Tammy Thomas, Ward 1, Matt Zimmerman, Ward 1, Eric Jenkins, Ward 2, Lisa Larson-Bonnell, Ward 3, Kurt Knappen, Ward 3, Lindsay Constance, Ward 4, and Jill Chalfie. Did I say that right? Ward 4. Before we begin our agenda, I'd like to explain our procedures for the public input. During the meeting, I will offer the opportunity for public input. If you would like to speak to the committee at any of those times, please go forward to the podium. I will ask you to state your name and address for the record. Then you may offer your comments. So that members of the audience can hear your comments, I would ask that you speak directly into the microphone. By policy, comments are limited to 5 minutes. Comments and remarks that are personal, impertinent, or slanderous are not permitted. Disruptive acts are not permitted. After you are finished, please sign the form on the podium to ensure you have an accurate record of your name and address. There are 2 items on tonight's agenda. Item number 1 is to discuss the acceptance of a private street at 69th and Bluejacket that provides access to the LaCrosse Subdivision. LaCrosse Subdivision was platted in 1987 with 15 single-family lots that were accessed by Bluejacket Street, a private cul-de-sac. The residents have requested that the city make the section of Bluejacket a public street. Staff would like direction from the city council, I think this means council committee, whether or not the dedication of Bluejacket Street as a public street is acceptable to the city prior to initiation of the replat and verification process by the LaCrosse Subdivision. Doug Allman, Community Development Director, will make a brief presentation.
Good evening. I don't have a PowerPoint necessarily for this, but I just have a couple of visuals that maybe give some context to the situation. As was said earlier, the subdivision was platted in 1987. It was platted with a private street easement to access 15 lots off of 69th Street. It was a traditional cul-de-sac design. At that time, the developer, when he had the concept for this subdivision, the idea was that it would be exclusive and that it would be gated. And that is the reason for the private street, because there would be no public access into the subdivision. Probably about a year ago, we were approached by residents in that subdivision about the idea of possibly accepting that cul-de-sac as a public street in lieu of a private drive into that subdivision. I think we met with Eric as well, had a productive meeting to give some context of what the subdivision looks like from the air. You can see, and I'll try to focus back out off of that. For all intents and purposes, it looks like a traditional R1 subdivision with a general cul-de-sac design. It has a full bulb turnaround. And from that meeting, we talked to the subdivision residents, and for a private street to become public, there are several things that have to be done. You'd have to dedicate public right-of-way. Reason for that would be for utilities and for ongoing maintenance of the street by the city. There'd be cost involved with possibly having to core the street. There's a stormwater drainage system in place that would need to be inspected. So before we put the possible applicant through that process, we wanted guidance from you all just to see if it was something that was reasonable. There is a policy statement that's been in effect since 1998 regarding private streets. In essence, private streets are extremely discouraged from being accepted prior to that 1998 date. The reason for that is that most, if not all, except for maybe this one, are not constructed to a city standard in terms of pavement width, pavement depth. They lack turnarounds and often have parking spaces within the private drive area. So it's not something that the city has been in the business of doing. But in this case, talking public works staff, community development staff, I don't think that this would be precedent setting, to be honest with you. The subdivision residents have been very upfront that they're willing to give up that right to a gate. They'll never be able to gate it if it does become a public street. The bricks that are at the entrance to the subdivision, I have a Google view. They've agreed that those would be eventually overlaid with asphalt under normal maintenance if it were to be taken up by the city. The street is essentially set up to be public. It has turnaround ability for snow removal, all of the things that we would generally look at. But the main thing is that there will be considerable costs involved to go through a process without some guidance of whether or not that's acceptable. So with that, I'm going to sit down. There are representatives from the subdivision here. If you have questions for them, if you have questions for me or Doug, we'd be glad to answer your questions.
All right, thank you. Staff is looking for direction on this item. Is there any discussion from the council? Lisa?
May I ask, have you been able to assess the current road situation or status? Like, is this something where if the city agrees to make it public, that it would immediately require urgent repairs?
Well, there are very detailed requirements within the packet memo. I think looking at the street, Doug, you probably can speak to this better than me, it looks like everything is okay, but prior to going through a platting procedure and prior to the city accepting that street, they would have to core it. They would also have to camera the existing stormwater system to make sure that the pipes weren't failing, those sort of things. We have a general thought that it's probably in good shape. They've maintained it over the years. You can see in one of the aerials, they've done crack sealing, those sort of things. The curbs appear to be in good shape. It has a traditional storm design with curb inlets. So it's not something that's non-traditional in terms of what the city's used to maintaining. But they'll have to verify several things before we would go down the real formal path of city acceptance.
All right, Matt?
Just one other question. Whoops. Going through the packet, it looks like both the residents and the city have gone through an extensive amount of work just getting this ready for tonight, and it looks great. I only had one question relative to the bricks at the entry point. If we got to resurface the bricks, is that going to create some kind of problem during that resurfacing effort? Does the question make sense?
I can speak to it if I don't answer it correctly. Doug's here.
Okay.
Generally, bricks serve as a subsurface to pavement all over the country, to be honest with you. In maintenance, I assume we would just mill those bricks, mill it, overlay it.
Overlay them.
Okay.
So it would be smooth for all intents and purposes. It'd be a very good sub base for asphalt.
Cool. All right.
Tammy?
Have to take an easement, is there a payment to the landowner, or how does that work?
Actually, this would be a platting process where the city would we would actually accept dedication of right-of-way. So today you have a private easement. That land would actually become public.
Okay, so
It would be
just take
deeded
the
and
easement.
dedicated to the city through plat. There's a right-of-way width that we would prescribe. Part of that plat would also establish the front building setback lines. One thing I didn't cover earlier that we want to be very clear about, and they understand and agree, that in perpetuity, the one thing that this subdivision doesn't have, and the residents like it, is it does not have a sidewalk or streetlights. And they have agreed they don't want that. The city doesn't necessarily want to maintain that over time, but it would be very clear on the plat, if we go down this path, that from now on, future generations that occupy those houses as they are sold will have a covenant and then a statement on the plat that they understand that from now on, there will never be a sidewalk at city expense installed in the subdivision.
All right, Eric?
Just a couple comments. First, I'd like to compliment all the players on this. I think city staff has done a really great job with this, and I think the residents have done a really great job with it too. So many times residents will raise a concern and then they kind of dump it on the city and you're supposed to just fix it or whatever. In this case, they've continued with the city working hand in hand through the whole process, and it's been a really good exchange. And I think that really helps facilitate the project. The fact that it meets all the city's road standards, or at least looks like it meets all the city's road standards right now, is a plus. They're taxpayers. They're paying their property taxes like everybody else. The fact that their streets will become another one of the streets that we maintain as a city, especially since we're taking it on in good shape to start with, seems quite appropriate, and I certainly totally support the project.
Kurt?
Actually, my question was answered. Sounded like Eric had been in on it from the very beginning, so I was curious what your opinion was, so thank you.
Like your consideration.
Sounds good. Okay, so is that enough direction for staff? It's good.
Start the pre-application process with the applicant to get a preliminary, actually, in this case, it will not be a preliminary plat. We'll just bring it through as a replat, a final plat. You'll see that. That'll actually come through Plan Commission and then to City Council. The property's already zoned. It's an R1 subdivision. So it's just a matter of engaging a land surveyor engineering company to come up with that. And then in the meantime, they'll start their due diligence in terms of videoing the storm line and doing the coring and the pavement verification that we'll require before we go forward.
All right, thank you, Doug. All right, item number 2 is the Johnson County Housing Services Program Overview. Johnson County Housing Services is a division of Johnson County Human Services, part of the Johnson County government. The Housing Services Division acts as the county's housing authority and administers the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Pam Harris, the Housing Resource Recruiter for Johnson County Human Services, will provide an overview of the program.
Good evening. I'm David Ward, Director of Johnson County Housing Services. With me tonight are Jess Moffel, Deputy Director, Pam Harris, Housing Resource Recruiter, and they will present briefly just a little information about our Housing Choice Voucher Program. Thank you.
Good evening. Jess Moffel, Johnson County Housing Services. First slide here is our mission statement. I won't read that to you, but providing services to vulnerable populations in general. We consist of our clients that we serve each year. Many people in Johnson County benefit from human services or from services provided by human services, but it's the thousands of other vulnerable citizens that are our focus. Generally, it's senior adults, people with a physical disability, low-income residents or working poor, and children under the age of 17. Human Services consists of 3 different divisions: the Area Agency on Aging, Housing Services, and our Outreach Department. Housing Services receives federal, state, and local funds to assist individuals and families. We have 4 major programs: the Johnson County Housing Authority Housing Choice Voucher Program, Family Self-Sufficiency Program, the Minor Home Rehab Program, and the Home Rehab Program. The Minor Home Rehab Program in Shawnee is funded with some of your CDBG dollars. The Human Services budget is approximately $23.5 million. You can see most of that, almost 75% is grant funding. Of that, Housing Services is about $15 million. And next up,
Hello, my name is Pam Harris. I am the Housing Resource Recruiter. It is a mouthful to say, but we thank you for having us here tonight. And as Jesse mentioned, overview of our human services. We also have in our Housing Service Department the Housing Choice Voucher Program, formerly known as Section 8. The program is a subsidy program to assist vulnerable families and with a portion of their rent to live in Johnson County area, with the exception of Olathe. The key words to note are housing choice. Johnson County Housing wants to offer participants housing units of different sizes and locations. We are tasked to provide housing options to people who are working poor, to people who are retired living solely on their Social Security, to people who are disabled living on Social Security, and to people who are current renters who happen to qualify for assistance. I'm sorry, We also offer the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. It's a voluntary program to our Housing Choice Voucher participants who are unemployed or underemployed to support a person in their economic situation by better employment, returning back to school, learning how to save money, or having goals to buy a house one day. And over a 5-year commitment to this program, a participant can work towards goals successfully to earn a personal escrow account to use at their discretion, hopefully for a down payment of a home. So who do we serve? We serve individuals and family who fit the categories for very low income and low income. Again, we are working with the working poor who may be that entry-level wage earner working in hospitality, caregiving industry, for example, in Johnson County, but cannot afford to live in Johnson County without housing assistance. So the affordability reality is the Housing Choice Program is essential to the low-income families who would otherwise not be able to afford a one-bedroom apartment in Johnson County. An average unsubsidized renter has to earn at least $16 per hour to afford a one-bedroom apartment, and that may be stretching it. Our participants would have to work at least 80 hours a week to afford that same one-bedroom apartment. And that scenario doesn't quite support a quality life or health. The housing subsidy also makes sure participants are living in safe and decent housing with an annual, non-intrusive inspection. And so my role as a recruiter is to create new landlord partnerships and retain existing ones, but also to educate the community that adequate housing is a basic human right for all income levels. At this time, I'll turn it back over to Jesse Moffel to share just a little bit of data.
All right, the Johnson County HCV program has 1,447 authorized vouchers to use within Johnson County outside of the city limits of Olathe. That number's been unchanged since 2009. A little bit on the demographics of the households we serve. 58 and over 58% are households with a disabled or elderly person. 43% of the people we serve are children under the age of 17. Currently, we serve just over 3,100 people in Johnson County. Our annual HAP budget for 2019 was just over $10.5 million. That's an average monthly HAP payment to local landlords or to landlords of over $900,000. All of those dollars go back to private for-profit landlords here in Johnson County or that operate housing here in Johnson County. So the conventional PHA has a little different structure than the Housing Choice Voucher Program. They would operate just with a lease between the housing authority and the tenant. We had a third section in there. We have a HAP contract with ourselves and the landlord so that we can pay them the rent they're due. We have a family obligation style contract to ensure that the voucher holder holds up their end of the agreement with our program. And then the tenant and landlord have a lease also that we're not a party to. One of our goals is deconcentration, so we're always looking for opportunities for our residents or our voucher holders to find housing in areas of low poverty. It's a double negative, but we want people to live in census tracts that are low poverty concentration. Within the city of Shawnee, there are 482 active vouchers. The ACS survey shows that there's about 10,000 rental units here in Shawnee, so we are about 5% of all of Shawnee rental properties. And with that, we're happy to stand for questions.
Thank you. This item is for informational purposes only. Is there any discussion by the council? Eric?
Just some questions so I understand what all you gave us here. I'm looking at the chart, the FY 2019 income limits housing services slide, and I don't really understand the 30, 50, and 80%. I know it's monitoring, I get that, but you know, if we're talking about qualifying people, what does that equate to? What does that mean?
For the Housing Choice Voucher Program, 75% of the families we serve have to be at or below 30%, the very low income. The other additional 25% have to be below 50%. And then with the CDBG and home programs, those qualify at 80% of AMI.
The CDBG and home programs would be for homeowners, okay, and then the Housing Choice Voucher, of course, is for rental assistance.
Okay,
Lisa?
there were a couple things.
May I ask what kind of housing this includes? Like, I think we traditionally will think apartments. Is, in Shawnee, we have a variety of housing. Are you also looking at private homes that are being rented out, or duplexes, or what kind of housing?
Yes to all of that. We have, predominantly it's apartment occupants. We have townhomes, duplexes, single families. Wouldn't you say is there really any other type? We have a few shared situations for maybe developmental disability situations, but other than that.
No mobile homes, anything like that, real property. And all of those homes must pass an inspection to ensure that they're safe, sanitary, and decent also before we'll pay HAP assistance on it.
Now,
Eric?
I just noticed that most of the money comes from grants. It shows here, I got the big purple spot, so 96% from grants. Who's your major grantor? Is that Department of Housing and Urban Development?
Yes, sir, it is. Yes, sir, it
Okay.
is. The vast majority of it comes from that.
Okay, well, the reason I'm kind of clicking off this stuff, I went to that last meeting of the Area Agency on the Aging, and they were identifying their goals and objectives and that kind of thing, and I sat in on that. So I was just kind of wondering, now you guys are the housing services part of it, or?
We're under the Human Services umbrella with the Area Agency on Aging. We do work closely with them there as far as,
Right, there's three divisions. Are you the Housing Services Division?
We're Housing Services, that's correct.
Okay.
Tammy?
When you talk about housing services, minor home rehabilitation, who are these minor children?
No, good question, though. That is, it's CDBG, okay, say that fast. CDBG funded out of Shawnee's entitlement, okay? They fund that program. We do, basically, as it says, minor home rehabilitation projects, furnace replacements, things like that, up to, generally speaking, $5,000, $8,000 if we're doing accessibility modifications, and it would be for homeowners. Okay.
Okay, you say Olathe is not part of this, is that, just curious why, you just?
We are too. It's always been that way. I think Olathe has their own park system, Olathe has their own library system and whatnot, and the housing authorities have just historically been separate.
Interesting.
We administer the home program in Olathe effective January 1st of this year. That's the major renovation project, and we've just taken that over from them. But otherwise, they do their own rental assistance program through the Housing Choice Voucher. They also have public housing, which we do not. Public housing would be basically the housing authority owns the units. We don't have that. Okay.
Yeah, just another follow-up question. Now, there's no integration between your guys' office and the city as far as the staff is involved. You're dealing pretty much just directly with the individuals, is that correct?
The city of Shawnee?
Yes.
Actually, we just kind of work in a maybe a consultative way. There's no like funding commitment from Shawnee to the Housing Choice Voucher program or anything like that, no.
Yeah, because you seem like you would deliver them directly to your applicants.
Right, we do.
You just work with them. I just wondered how we would get involved with you, or if we do get involved with you, if there's any kind of coordination requirements or.
But we do manage the minor home rehabilitation program, right?
Yes, that is correct. That is correct. And that's the only program that you do.
Kurt?
Yes.
Yeah, quick question. So I'm new on the council. Great to get this information and get up to speed on everything, but I know this is for informational purposes only, but what's the ask of city council, or is there any requests, or is it just informational, continued support, or?
Awareness.
Awareness? Okay, thank you.
Joe?
Quick question. The percentage of 482 active vouchers, and which is 5% of our rental properties, like how does that compare to our sister cities? Do you know that offhand, or?
Offhand, I think of course, larger population cities would see a larger portion of the thing, and it does follow, I'd say, fairly solidly the populations, wouldn't it?
Yes.
So,
And we don't stipulate where people live. When we give them a voucher to look for housing, the name of the program is Housing Choice Vouchers. So they're charged with finding their own housing that's suitable for their family. And luckily, we're able to house almost 500 people in Shawnee.
So just to clarify, the percentage is roughly similar.
To population.
The exact number fluctuates. Okay.
Lisa?
I read somewhere recently that there's a wait list for people with a housing choice voucher. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, actually, the wait list is fairly much a constant reality for us. Okay, I have far more demand for assistance than I have the availability of vouchers to assist. With 1,447, that's been the same number since 2009. We're actually serving inside of 10% of who would be potentially eligible based on the 30% poverty statistics there. So when I look at the 30% of the income level, that approximates 100% of poverty. If you take the poverty count in Johnson County that United Community Services publishes, for example, the poverty count would say there's maybe 30,000 people. We're housing 3,000, so we're just extrapolating to about 10% of that. The need is far greater than we're able to serve. To give you an idea, the wait list was last open in
October of last year.
October 2018. Okay, right, 18? Yeah. And we take 1,000 applications for it, closed in 1 hour and 4 minutes. So there is way more demand than we're able to serve.
So what does that really mean? I mean, for somebody who is eligible for these services and you say, hey, we can get you a housing choice voucher, does it mean that we don't have enough places that accept this program? Is it that we literally don't have enough vouchers to go around? What?
Yes to all of that. Pam, do you want to address how that?
Well, I mean, what it means is there's truly affordable housing shortage. And so one reason I was brought on in June was because of that reason, to be able to reach out to community and bring that awareness to create more options. But we have people in our program who have vouchers who are looking for housing and have a limited time to look for that housing.
Right here on Shawnee, right in Neiman.
Tammy?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, the vouchers have a 60-day valid period. We can do 2 30-day extensions, so that brings you to 120 days. So the clock is ticking when you're starting to search for housing.
And it's not specific to Shawnee, they can look in Overland Park, Lenexa, Shawnee.
Lenexa, they can, and in certain instances, they can
Fairway,
look
Prairie
outside of
Village.
our jurisdiction as well.
Okay. Another question, how are you working with children aging out of the foster care system? Because those kids are high need, they've been in foster homes, they've been in this place and that place, and as they age out, how do those kids come in and rank to be eligible? How is there a process with DCF that you partner? Hey, we've got a 17-and-a-half-year-old that's almost 18, judge is going to release them from custody. What kind of,
Without question, there's a need for that. It's based on income for us. So if you're on the wait list, you're going to be served. We have 3 preferences on our wait list. They are not weighted preferences, okay? The first one would be if you're elderly or disabled. The second would be if you live or work in Johnson County presently. The third would be if you're a victim of domestic violence. So the aging out of foster care, someone who is 18 could be on the wait list, but we do not have a special preference for that.
Okay. Do you start working with DCF early on?
We do
when these
look at
kids are aging
grant
out?
opportunities to see if there's funds available to partner with someone to do things like that.
Okay.
Family unification or non-elderly disabled, some of those opportunities are once in a while available.
And what's the eligibility process? How is it documented that folks are eligible? And how is it reviewed annually, every 6 months?
It is documented. We verify all the information to make sure that people are indeed eligible, income eligible. We also have background information that needs to be matched as well, criminal background check, things like that. There are certain things in an applicant's history that would be an absolute showstopper from participating on the program. So that would basically knock someone out of contention. Once they're on the program, we have an obligation to at least annually recertify them. So we'll calculate the income, we'll verify the income, and then calculate the rent subsidy based on that on an annual basis. If people get a job, lose a job, something like that, we'll do interim reassessments as well as needed.
What about like a one-bedroom, one person comes in, moves in, they're eligible, and then they have a friend move in with them? How does that work?
I'm going to have a problem with that.
Okay. So all of a sudden you got more income.
You have an unauthorized occupant, you have a lease violation, it goes on,
Okay.
and the income is a part of it.
Yep.
So, okay, but yes, that would be a problem.
Lisa?
This is a question for Ms. Harris, and I'd like to know specifically about your experiences in Shawnee. If I'm understanding your role correctly, you reach out to local rental unit owners, and you say, hey, we would really like for you to be a part of the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And I'm assuming that no one apartment complex, for instance, is going to say, hey, every single one of our units would be great for this program. So can you tell me a little bit first about the reception that you get from the landlords, and then also what your average reality is? So say that there's a landlord that's even amenable to doing this. How many units would you say on average of their total available would they be willing to commit to a program like this?
Well, it's not that easily done. So it is sales, it's marketing like other services that are sold. And so typically I'm looking not to work with that property manager on site, but the owner of that property company. Has to be a strategic approach because they are the decision makers. And so that's what, really the goal is to get to the decision makers and really, just again, have a good conversation about how this would work for us and how this will work for them. We ask for no exceptions with our private landlords or property companies. Our participants have to go through the same background checks and all of that kind of stuff. So as long as we can kind of, establish some foundation of how we're working, it is a business to business that we consider ourselves doing, so that's typically how we go about it.
I have my soapbox with me, as luck would have it, so I'll just follow on to that if I may. All of the rental assistance funds, we're taking public funds and returning them to the private sector. We have about 229 landlords jurisdiction-wide who participate in the program. 228 are for-profit. So we are taking the rental assistance and it is going back to the private sector. I think that makes a statement about the program. I had another thought and I blanked, so anyway, thanks.
Any other comments? So once again, this was for informational purposes only. And that concludes our agenda for tonight. I will accept the motion to adjourn. Motion has been made and seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay.
Thanks, folks, for coming out tonight.